Hey, what is going on, everybody out there? This is Jakejames Lugo. Welcome to the channel and welcome to this brand new episode of JJ's One Man Podcast. Now, this is a surprise episode because I didn't expect myself to actually do this episode or let alone a brand new episode anytime soon because I had just recently finished my stuff for Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I got the video review up on the channel, which, by the way, you guys could go check it out right now. It's live for everybody at the moment. Check it out after this podcast episode, though. But the point is, I had a lot to say about Jedi Survivor. I had a whole bunch of stuff to discuss with that game, so the video review is out. I thought I was good. I thought I was going to chill. I thought I was going to ride things out until Street Fighter 6 or Final Fantasy 16 comes out next month. I thought everything was all good. And then it happened. What happened exactly? I saw the GQ UK, or at least the British GQ or whatnot, on their website, the 100 greatest video games of all time ranked by experts. So we already know where this is going, right? Like, we already know what's going down anytime soon. Like, when you see lists like this, there's almost always going to be problems. And in reality, it shouldn't be that much of a big deal. It shouldn't be something that, like, people get upset about, people care about, but it's fun stuff to discuss, especially in content like this for a podcast. So I was like, you know what? Let me just look through it and see what they had to say, right? According to this whole post here, it's 100 games that they rank as the greatest video games of all time. There's a whole bunch of stuff here and there about various different games from various different eras. And they went to various different game developers, streamers, directors, writers, and a whole bunch of other people to talk about this stuff, to rank all the different games that are the best of all time, with number one being the greatest game of all time. Funny enough, how nobody agrees on that, but we'll get to that when we get to it, right? So let's just go through the list, right? Let's see. We're not going to go through every game. We're going to kind of jump around and we're going to talk about some of the big talking points that I want to discuss with this because, man, after reading this list, let me tell you all, like, there's like such a limited scope of perspective amongst not only the people that they go to contribute to this list, but also just some of the games that they considered as some of the best of all time. Like, even me, I have my own preferences. I have my own stances when it comes to which game is better than what other game or all this other stuff about gaming as a whole. I may have not been around for most of the 80s, let alone the dawn of gaming with, like, you know, the Atari 2600 and stuff. But I know that there is some level of respect that you got to give to those eras that are not only included games that were timeless, games that people constantly refer to or go back to, but also even to this day still have one-ups on some of the more modern games that we get now these days. That doesn't necessarily mean that most games back then are better than the ones we get now, but there are those standouts that are considered timeless for one reason or another. But I'm getting ahead of myself, right? My main thing is that I found it very weird, the limited perspective and the limited scope of some of the games that were chosen here and some of the placements for some of these games. And then when you go and look at the list of people that contributed to this thing, you know, some of the experts, quote unquote, that they went to, you start to really find things that are really questionable and start to put two and two together. It's just kind of weird. It almost feels like some people that were included in here were, for one reason or another, probably including some of their friends, probably some of this other stuff. I don't know. But it does look kind of weird and look very awkward. And it makes you kind of understand some of the reasons why certain games were picked over others and why certain games were placed higher than others. I don't know. Take with that whatever you will. I'll link the actual article in the description box so you guys can look at the list yourself or look at it while I'm talking with all this, right? But I digress. Let's get to the list themselves. So number 100, what's at the bottom of the list, right? Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 1 from 2004. So already we're getting started on a crappy foot, right? The main thing is, for me personally, I don't know why this is scored so low. Like, again, I have to keep reiterating this throughout the entirety of this episode. These lists don't matter, but for the sake of this discussion, we're going to kind of, go all out in our discussion of this, whether I'm going to while out or have a problem with some of the placements of these games, but we're just discussing it. So don't take it too much to the heart, but be part of the conversation and the beef is all I'm saying. Anyway, okay, number 100 for Knights of the Old Republic, KOTOR, the original KOTOR, which to me was better than the second game. You could go find my video review of KOTOR on the channel right now and see exactly what I had to say about that game. I really fully believe, like I said in that video, that this is a must-play game for any RPG fan. Like, it's a game that I feel like people could constantly go back to and refer to as one of the better RPGs of all time because of its size, because of its scope, because of the things that it does for the Star Wars galaxy and the whole universe of Star Wars, and let alone borrowing elements from other JRPGs. To score that as number 100 of the greatest games of all time when there's so many other games, not only on this list, but other games out there that makes KOTOR so much more better than them. Like, come on now. Like, I digress, though. We're only just getting started here. So I'm jumping along. I see games like Rez. I see Age of Empires. I see Return of Otobrain. But then we get to the next problem, okay? Then we get to the next problem that I have with this list. Number 96. Mind you, number 96. The original Super Mario Brothers from 1985. Like, are we kidding here? Are we kidding ourselves? Number 96 out of 100 of the greatest games of all time. Super Mario Brothers, the original on the original NES, okay, is immaculate. That's a game that not only built the foundation for many other big AAA games that came afterwards, but it's also a timeless game that people constantly go back to. Why do you think the Super Mario Brothers movie was so successful not too long ago when that movie came out? Why do you think that when people hear those first few notes of the Super Mario Brothers theme, they get excited? Because Super Mario Brothers literally is a timeless game that everybody loves. That is not only fun to play on the NES, but it's still even fun to play nowadays. This is a game you could constantly go back to and really enjoy yourself. I would argue than most other AAA games nowadays. It's also applicable to many other people outside of the gaming sphere. Like, I understand some people are going to prefer their AAA games that are like, filled with like amazing 3D graphics, with amazing like online play and all these other things. But when you really get to the heart of what makes a game and what makes a game like one of the greatest of all time, amongst all eras, Super Mario Brothers has to be far higher on this list. 96? Oh, underneath a lot of other games that I saw on here, that to me is a crime. Like, come on now. You would not have a lot of the games that you have right now without Super Mario Brothers. But even then, if you take away that aspect out of it, the sheer fact that you could play this game and have no issues whatsoever and have an amazing time, and then give it to your sibling or give it to a loved one, give it to another family member, and they could get into it just as much as you, and they don't even need to be like that much of a gamer. This deserves to be so much higher on this list. But I digress. Let's keep it moving, right? Then we start seeing games like Ultima Underworlds. Then I see Okami is 94, which I think probably that should have been higher because it's a really beautiful game, but I understand, like, in comparison to many others that I would include on this list. Fable 2, Mass Effect. Mass Effect is number 92. And I'm surprised with that because there's multiple games from various different franchises and series on this list, and they score this as number 92. Like, in comparison to the other Mass Effect games, 2 and 3 specifically, I feel like a lot of people go back to this one for the RPG elements, but they go to Mass Effect 2 for like the shooter elements. And it's a really weird conversation to have amongst people. But as far as the 100 greatest games of all time, I'd probably, if I was going to include that game, I would include it higher, but I probably wouldn't like include this one over other games like 2 and 3. Like, again, some of the other games are scored higher on this list, but still, if you had to include one game, I feel like you include this because of it being like a really good and interesting RPG, but I feel like you include Mass Effect 2 instead because of what it does afterwards. Because remember, you have to look at Mass Effect as a series because your progress between all three games transfers over. And while it's good for a lot of people to experience like certain worlds and stuff within their RPGs and stuff, I think when you look at the whole series as a whole, you could really start to see the charm of that, why people love Mass Effect. But as an individual game, I don't know if I would include it so low, let alone include it at all. Now, then we get into games like Grand Theft Auto 4, Super Mario Kart, number 90, okay? Super Mario Kart, this is weird because this is the only Mario Kart game that's on this list. Now, I find that weird because I would include Mario Kart 64, maybe Mario Kart Double Dash, probably a lot higher than this, let alone I would include those games over the original Super Mario Kart because I think while Super Mario Kart was great, a lot of people don't go back to that game. A lot of people go back to Mario Kart 64 more often, or they probably go to Mario Kart Double Dash. You could argue Mario Kart 7 or 8, because a little bit of recency bias, which is what this list feels like it's totally plagued with, but still, number 90 for Mario Kart, like I wouldn't have even included Mario Kart on this list. So let's continue. Then we start seeing like Hitman World of Assassins, The Last Guardian. I don't even know why The Last Guardian is included on this list. Like, I understand that people love that Studio Japan. They love Shadow of the Colossus. They love The Last Guardian. They love all their games. But I feel like they're way too overrated in comparison to a lot of other games out there. Even if you're talking about games that are art, I would argue there are still other games out there that do a little bit more than what something like The Last Guardian does. So 88, it's low on the list, but still, like, I don't know if I would have included it in my own. Then we get Super Mario Odyssey, which is low on this list, but still, I don't even know if I would include this over other Mario games. Civilization 5, which maybe you could include some of the other Civilization games, but again, I'm not a big RTS fan, so I can't speak to it. Number 85 is Final Fantasy XIV, A Realm Reborn. Now, by the way, let me take a sip of this drink real quick, because I feel like I'm going to need it as we go through this list, right? So, Number 85, Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn. If you want to talk about MMOs, right? I'll even look on it right now because we're going to jump across this. So let me even look. World of Warcraft. Okay, so no, it's still on this list, so we'll get to it eventually. But still, I will say what is it? Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn, I feel like is way too low on this list, right? Sorry about the typing, by the way. So you're going to hear a lot of that as we jump around this list. So A Realm Reborn, I feel like is way too low here because not only did it end up being one of the better MMOs out there, after Final Fantasy XI, a lot of people really love that game. And even after World of Warcraft, which I feel like is the MMO that would be included on something like this. But A Realm Reborn, if you're going to include it, I feel like it needs to be higher because not only does it have so much content that MMO players could dive into over a very long period of time, I think that it looks better than most other MMOs out there. I feel like it really does a lot for streamlining the MMO genre for many people. And as far as the greatest games of all time, I would include it so much more higher on a list like this. Then we get into 84, Shenmue, which I don't know why so many people are so addicted to something like Shenmue. I understand there's a charm to it, but I feel like this game and this series, Shenmue 1, 2, and 3, incredibly overhyped. Incredibly overhyped. There is so much nostalgia, rose-tinted glasses going on with this game, let alone this series, that is crazy to me. And you could tell by when you look at some of the people that they went to for this list to contribute to it, you can understand why they would pick something like Shenmue. And I think that they're totally wrong because there's so many other games that are better than Shenmue that should have been on this list. So then we get into stuff like BioShock Infinite, which is 83, which it's okay. BioShock is all right. But I would include BioShock 1 and 2 to be much more better games to include on here. I think BioShock 1, if you had to just include one game from that series, is really the game you go to. Then we get to Dragon Age Origins, then Fortnite. I understand why Fortnite is on this list. I don't like Fortnite. Maybe it should be a little bit higher or lower depending on who you are. Fortnite is a game that's really blended together a lot of different communities and a lot of different licenses. And it's been so streamlined for so many different people across many different platforms. So I understand why it's there. Then we get games like Firewatch for some reason is on here. Tetris Effect. This is the second Tetris game that's on here, okay? The other Tetris game, which is the original, we'll get to later. But Tetris Effect, I wouldn't have never even included it on here. Because when you really get to the heart of it, Tetris itself, it's really just one style of game that's just remixed over and over again. So when you look at all these other versions of Tetris outside of maybe the virtual reality and some of the other 3D versions of Tetris, it's not really that different. So why include Tetris Effect when you could just include the original Tetris and cover the scope of that series? But I digress. I guess people really like playing this game in VR, but whatever. Then we get into Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, which is cool. I would have rather included Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1, maybe a little bit higher. Secret of Monkey Island, I think that one should be higher too, because when it comes to adventure games, I feel like a lot of people really love that. Then we get to Pokemon Gold and Silver, number 76. To me, I love Pokemon Blue. Pokemon Blue Gen 1 is the best one in my opinion, but Pokemon Gold and Silver really took that Generation 1 and 2, and that region of Kanto with Johto and took it to the next level, because this Pokemon Gold and Silver was the game that made it so much bigger to explore in the Pokemon world, and I feel like this should be much higher on the list. If you're not going to include the original Pokemon games, Red, Blue, and Yellow, then include Pokemon Gold and Silver on a much more higher point on this list, because man, those games were freaking great, man. Well, I don't understand why they would score it so low. Then we get to Metroid Prime, which I understand the hype for Metroid Prime. Metroid Prime is cool. Maybe this one's a little bit low because I would argue that there's other better first-person shooters there, but at least with Retro Studios, what they did on the GameCube, I thought was really awesome. It was really cool. Then we get Undertale. This is another game that I feel like is so overhyped and is plagued by recency bias, because I understand what Undertale was trying to do, but I feel like this is a game that really internet culture really latched onto and made it much more of a bigger thing than what it actually was. Because I've played Undertale. I've done both the peaceful run and the chaotic run, or at least the good and the bad run, where you get the different endings and stuff. And I feel like while there is a lot of difference there, I don't feel like it's a game that's as good as other RPGs or other games of similar nature. To include it on the best games of all time, I think is a little bit of a stretch, and again, further overhyping it. That's just my opinion. Now, here's another problem. And this one, I haven't even played a whole lot of it, but I understand why people love it. Number 73, Final Fantasy VI. And the reason why this is a problem to me after looking through the list is when you realize what other Final Fantasy games and other games they put over this. Final Fantasy VI people love. people love Final Fantasy VI. I like Final Fantasy IV more, but I still have to play more Final Fantasy VI like in its entirety at some point. But I understand the charm of this game and why people keep going back to it and say it's one of the better 2D Final Fantasy games of all time. But to put it at 73 of the best games of all time like that, come on now. This deserves to be higher. Then we start seeing games like Yakuza 0, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the original Call of Duty 4, I think should be much higher. This one's number 71. Still. Then they put above it Left 4 Dead 2 above Call of Duty 4. Like, come on, son. Like, even if you never played a lot of either game, you know the impact that Call of Duty 4 had. That fundamentally changed the first-person shooter genre. And you mean to tell me that Left 4 Dead 2 is much better, or better by any stretch, than Call of Duty 4? Come on now. Then we start getting, then here's another one that I got a problem with. And even then, I don't like this game as much as I do other games in the series. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, number 69. Nice. The point is, though, this game should be much higher. I don't understand why it's so low compared to other games that are on this list. Then we start getting to Thief, The Dark Project. I don't know why this is on here. The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker is number 67. There's multiple Zelda games on this list, but some of the placements of these games I just don't feel, man. It's right behind Fallout New Vegas, which I like New Vegas. I've played a good chunk of it from a while back, but, better than, Wind Waker and Majora's Mask? Like, I don't know. There's an argument there that should be weird. Okay, now we start getting to GoldenEye 007, number 65, which that game hasn't aged all that well, so I understand the low placement. Then we get to 64, Persona 5. Come on, son. This game is phenomenal, and you put it number 64? Come on, B. Come on. That's one of the only games I've ever reviewed that I gave a 10 out of 10 as a perfect score in a written review. That should not be number 64. Now, granted, it shouldn't be in the top 30, but it's definitely not number 64. Come on now. Then we get into The Sims 2. Then Castlevania Symphony of the Night, number 62. This one is way too low. And the funny thing is, this is the only Castlevania game on this list from what I saw, which is a damn shame because there's no Castlevania 1, there's no Castlevania 3. It's like, come on, bro. Come on. I understand the impact of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. It literally was the next one to really kind of further the Metroidvania genre as we know it, which really started out with Super Metroid. I know that Metroidvania is a term that's thrown around a lot, but Castlevania Symphony of the Night, as good as it is, it should be much higher on this list, but definitely there should have been another Castlevania game included on here besides this. If we're going to include multiple games from a different series and stuff, this should have been on here with Castlevania 1 and Castlevania 3. Real talk, okay? But it definitely is not number 62. Get out of here. Then I see Grand Theft Auto 3 is number 61. That's way too low. Super Metroid, just number 60. Like, come on. This is another one that I feel like is way too low. Like, Super Metroid is great. In my opinion, I feel like things got better with like Metroid, not Metroid Other M, Metroid Fusion was the one that came after this. And then even the Metroid, games that came afterwards, like Metroid Dread. Things got better, but Super Metroid specifically really fundamentally like built a good foundation of a genre that ended up getting better with each successive game. So it should be much higher on this list over some other games. Like, then we get Fallout 3. A lot of people love Fallout 3, which I also think is a little bit too low. The Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion, which I understand why it's on here. Maybe I wouldn't have included it on here. I would have rather include Skyrim, which I think is much higher. Now, here we go. Here comes another one. Final Fantasy IX. You mean to tell me you scored this one higher on the list over Final Fantasy VI? Again, I haven't played a whole lot of Final Fantasy VI, but I did play Final Fantasy IX. I have a review on the channel right now that you guys could go look at for Final Fantasy IX. This game is overhyped. And the reason why that it's overhyped is because a lot of people don't like Final Fantasy VIII, that they wanted to go back to what they felt with Final Fantasy VII or some of the older Final Fantasy games. So because there are a lot of characteristics that are similar to that older Final Fantasy style, this one gets really like pushed up on a lot of people's list. I don't think Final Fantasy IX is better than many of the other Final Fantasy games. Real talk. Even though I know Zidane, I know Kuja, I know all these characters, Garnet, Steiner, they're great. And the gameplay is pretty solid, but I hardly ever remember the world of Final Fantasy IX, which I think is a big sticking point for a lot of these great games within that series. You remember Spira from Final Fantasy X. You remember a lot of the different places you go to in Final Fantasy IV. The Kingdom of Baron and all these other places. Like, you hardly ever remember that from Final Fantasy IX. So there's a lot of other things, but we'll be here all day if I really talk about it. So, moving on with this list, we get to Inside, then we get to Hollow Knight, Then we get to Ico, which is, again, another one that I feel like is way overhyped. I don't know if I would even include it on this list, especially over something like The Last Guardian or even Shadow of the Colossus, but I digress, whatever. Then we get Dishonored 2, which seems kind of random. Like, I thought Dishonored 2 was great. I actually helped write the IGN guide for Dishonored 2. I did the good playthrough for Emily's playthrough in Dishonored 2. So I don't think it's number 53 on the greatest games of all time. That seems like way too up there. Then we get Half-Life. It's like, Half-Life is good. I mean, don't get me wrong, it actually should be higher, but again, like when you look at some of the other games that it's over and some of the games that are over it's really weird with that placement. Then we get Final Fantasy X as number 51. I like Final Fantasy X. I think that Final Fantasy X is great. I really enjoy it. I don't know if it's necessarily better than Final Fantasy VI, let alone any of the other games that I've mentioned before on this list. I feel like, maybe it should be higher or lower depending on whatever you feel like, but still, we got to be real here. Then we get Splunky as number 50. Splunky is the number 50 greatest game of all time. Really now? Really? I digress. Better than Super Mario Brothers, right? Come on now. Anyway, Stardew Valley is number 49. I don't play a lot of Stardew Valley. I understand the charm, but I don't think it's better than half the games I've even mentioned. Grand Theft Auto 5, number 48. This game continues to sell, which I think is crazy. It's a great game, but so in my personal opinion, like after having played it, after having seen it, how well it's done over the years, and how well it's actually stuck around. Grand Theft Auto 5, to me, should be higher. I feel like it should be higher, more than the top 50, to be honest with you. It should be like the top 30, maybe. Okay. Then we get God of War 2018, which, again, this one, the reboot of God of War, I feel like was good. I feel like a lot of people love that reboot. Whether it's better than the original God of War games or not is it's more of a matter of preference, and it's really subjective. But the number 47 greatest game of all time, I don't know. That's a maybe for me. I don't know if I would include it in the top 50, to be honest with you. Destiny is number 46. I don't think that to me, that's way too high up. Destiny is way too high. Halo 3 is right afterwards. Halo 3, I feel like should be higher. And the reason being is because not only do I feel like it's one of the greatest conclusions of a trilogy of all time in gaming, also how much fun it was to play both single player and multiplayer and what it did to build upon the foundation of the first Halo game. I don't think it should be higher than the first Halo game. Don't get me wrong, but still higher than the top 50 personally. So after that, then we get the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, which is another weird pick or placement of this one. I feel like it should be a lot less if you're going to include it. Then Nier Automata. Why is Nier Automata in the top 50? Like, I understand Nier Automata is great. I helped write the guide for Nier Automata on IGN. I did the video stuff for it, and I've reviewed Nier Automata here on this channel. But come on now. Top number 43, the greatest games of all time? Nah, bro. Nah. That's a hard no for me. It's right next to Chrono Trigger. Come on, son. Come on, son. Like, really, GQ? This is how I know they got a very limited scope of people that they went to for this list. Number 42 on the greatest games of all time. One of the best RPGs out there, JRPGs, I mean, out there that people constantly go back to. Whether you're big into the JRPG genre or not, this game definitely needs to be higher than 42. Come on, son. Multiple endings, a whole bunch of great characters, a lot of great gameplay, a lot of good-looking gameplay, fantastic sprites. Like, come on, son. Number 42, get out of here. It's right behind The Sims. Like, to me, I'm just salty about The Sims now. I don't understand too much of why people are into The Sims that much. This is the reboot of The Sims from 2000, but still, I'm still salty about that pick for Chrono Trigger. Then number 40, we get Super Mario Galaxy. It's like, okay. Super Mario Galaxy is great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not hating on Super Mario Galaxy. Top 40 of all time? I don't know about that one. I don't know. That's weird. So, number 39, we got What Remains of Edith Finch. This one, I don't even understand why it's up there like that. I would have rather put something like Gone Home than What Remains of Edith Finch on here. Because at least, I feel like more people have played Gone Home. But I also feel like, compared to some of the other games that we've gone past in the top 40 already, like, I don't think this game is above all those. Like, hell no. Then number 30, Hades. Come on, son. More than all the other games we've mentioned. Really. I like Hades. I think Hades was one of the top picks of 2020 as far as the game of the year back then. I thought Hades was excellent. But the number 38 of all time, there's some recency bias on this list that is crazy. Now we start getting into a little bit better placement, right? The next game, Silent Hill 2. Now, I know that some people that love the horror genre would score Silent Hill 2 higher on their list, or they would probably put it maybe behind Resident Evil 2. but that really depends, or behind something like Dead Space or whatever. But to me, Silent Hill 2 feels like it's at a good placement here, at least in the top 40, because this is the game out of that series that I feel like more people remember, people love, but it also does a lot of interesting things for the horror genre that you didn't really get from like Resident Evil or from other games that came afterwards. Then we start getting to number 36, Super Mario Bros. 3, which I feel like is way too low. I feel like Super Mario Bros. 3 should be much higher on this list because that's another game that, again, really fundamentally changed the Mario series, but also really did a lot of stuff for both the NES and even bled off into the Super NES afterwards that I feel like a lot of more people really go back to. Number 36, I don't know. I feel like that's way too low for it. Here's another one that's way too low. Portal, number 35. Portal to me is a game that borrows elements of first-person shooter stuff from like Half-Life, but really tries to put it into like a puzzle game type of like format, or at least a puzzle game type of like, niche. And I feel like that's a game that you're going to end up playing multiple times and get different things out of it with the different puzzles you could do, the story, which is a little bit weird. And it's like, it really starts to unfold the more that you get into it. It feels like this game, at least as far as like clever game design and clever ideas and concepts implemented into a video game, this should be much higher on that list. Now we get number 34, Uncharted 2. I like Uncharted 2. I think Uncharted 3 is better, but this one I feel like should be much lower on the list if you're going to include it. I don't know if I would even include Uncharted 2 like that because I think Uncharted 3 is the better game, but I digress. Then here's another one that's too low on the list. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, number 33. Like, come on, bro. Like, here's the thing. I'm more of a fan of Metal Gear Solid 2 than I am of Metal Gear Solid 3, but I feel like this needs to be at least a little bit higher than the top 30. At least in the top 30, like, because Metal Gear Solid 3 really kind of like emphasizes a lot of the presentation and the cinematography and the overall like movie-esque type of quality for a video game, for a AAA video game, because that's a Kojima hallmark. That started with MGS1 really, as far as on the original PlayStation, but you could even argue it goes back to the MSX with the original Metal Gear games. But with this one, it really takes you back. It kind of like limits your technology from like the futuristic era, puts you in the 60s, makes you really like home down on like the whole stealth element, all the survival elements, and really kind of gives you all these crazy characters that build up this whole series. So this to me, I feel like is way too low. Deus Ex, number 32. I feel like this one should be lower because I think that the Deus Ex series got better, and there's far better FPS games, in my opinion, that I think are a little bit much more better suited for this list. Then number 31, Shadow of the Colossus, the 2005 version. To me, again, this game is just way overhyped. I've played Shadow of the Colossus, the original, and the remake of it multiple times. I feel like, again, this game is just way too overhyped. A lot of people try to look at it as like high art and stuff, and I get it, but it's not as enjoyable as many other games. Then number 30. Now we're in the top 30, right? The Outer Wilds. This should not be in the top 30. Real talk. I haven't played a lot of the Outer Wilds, and I understand the charm of it, but the top 30 of all time? Really? Nah, bro. This should be at least in the 60s, I feel like. Or way around that area, way down below on this list. I wouldn't even really include it, personally. But that's just me. I know a lot of people like the Outer Wilds, but not top 30 for me. Hell no. Journey. Here's one that I also feel like is way too low. Number 29 is Journey, son. Come on, bro. Journey, the game that really elicits an emotional response from so many people when they play this game and doesn't even need to say a word. And it's really short. It's like less than an hour. You could probably knock out Journey in like less than 30 minutes if you're really good at it. But like the beautiful visuals, the lack of dialogue, but such a illicit emotion to come out of this. You put this at number 29, and then all the people, you look at the list that they got for all the people that they got to contribute to this game, which, by the way, a good number of those names that I recognize were really bigging up Journey back in the day in 2012. And you mean to tell me it's only number 29 on this list? Come on now. Come on now, man. Like, seriously. Like, this game deserves to be much higher. Straight up. If you've played Journey, you know exactly why I say that. So, if you haven't, go play Journey. It's on PlayStation Network. I'm pretty sure you could download it on your modern console on either PSN or whatnot, or your PS4 or PS5. But it's a game you definitely need to play. That game deserves to be much higher than number 29. And it definitely deserves to be higher than this next one, which is The Last of Us Part 2. I'm sorry, The Last of Us Part 2 should not be in the top 30. Real talk. I know a lot of people like The Last of Us Part 2. I don't think Part 2 is better than Part 1, but I also feel like this game gets a lot of overhyping from a lot of people, especially those in the gaming media. A lot of people really overhype this game. It felt like the conversation around it was a lot worse than the game itself, because the game is not that bad. I don't think the game is garbage, but the top number 28 of the greatest games of all time, heck no. Not over a lot of the other games that we've gone over so far, and especially not over Journey. I'm sorry. Journey is just a much better video game as far as art form is concerned. Now, here's another one. Oh, my God. I'm going to need... Hold on. Let me take a sip of this drink real quick. You want to talk about one that I'm really salty about, right? Number 27, Street Fighter 2. Come on, bro. Come on. Number 27 of the greatest games of all time. Now, let's be honest here for a second. When I say Street Fighter 2 should be much higher on this list, I feel like the version that we all should be talking about is Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which, by the way, they use the picture on this list of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, even though they're talking about the original Street Fighter 2, which you got to be not only more specific, I feel like, because you're talking about the series Street Fighter 2 because it had multiple iterations. You're really talking about Super Street Fighter 2 here, Turbo, specifically. That game should be much higher on this list. That should be literally in the top 15, if not the top 10, because Street Fighter 2 or Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo literally is responsible for the foundation of the fighting game community, the competitive gaming community, and esports, and a lot of what we know of the fighting game genre today. Straight up, that people go back to, they constantly play. It still looks good and sounds good. It has a lot of iconic things about it that have influenced the culture of gaming. Why is this number 27? This is why I know a lot of the people that they went to not only don't play a lot of fighting games, which if you notice, by the way, we'll get into later, there are certain fighting game series that are not included on this list. And it's surprising to see Street Fighter 2 this low, let alone even on this list at all, with some of the absence of other fighting games on here, right? But I digress. This game should be so much higher. Straight up. Top 15 or top 10 at least. Because Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo is one of the best fighting games of all time. One of the most influential fighting games of all time. This is a damn shame. Damn shame that it had to be put down that far. And here's another one too that I feel like should be a little bit higher. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This is another game that I feel like is so influential outside of the original Zelda on NES that not only paved the way for games like Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, but is also referenced and is really beloved by a lot of people that people go back and play this game as a hallmark of the SNES. Why is it so low on this list? It's not even the top 25. It's just before it. Like, come on now. I did a review of that game, and on my review, I said, like, this is a game that you would not get a lot of other Zelda games had it not been for this one. Straight up. And it's still great to play even today. So, anyway, moving on. Now we get to the top 25. Now we start to have a lot of problems, okay? We start to get mad problems in here, which I feel like a lot of the placements on this list start to get really crazy. This is going to be a long episode, people. We're already past the 30-minute mark. If you haven't already noticed, trust me, there's beef with all this stuff here in the top 25, but hang with me. We're going to get into all these games. I thought I wasn't going to do this. I was going to skip over, but no, I got too many problems with these games that are the way that they're placed, okay? Number 25 is Pokemon Red and Blue. This is what I feel like, this game, I feel like maybe should be even a little bit higher, but I would put Pokemon Gold and Silver over Red and Blue. That's a personal thing for me because I think Red and Blue is great. It built the foundation of the entire Pokemon franchise, but Gold and Silver is the better game that will last longer, in my opinion. Gen 1 and 2 together with more areas to go visit, more badges to win. Why would you put Gold and Silver so low on the list and then put this one here above it? Like, I feel like Gold and Silver should be higher and Pokemon Red and Blue should be a little bit lower, but I digress. I still think Pokemon Red and Blue is still one of the greatest games of all time because it's baby's first JRPG, but still, I would mix and match a lot of stuff here. Number 24, Minecraft. The problem I have with Minecraft, and it's not because I have an issue with the concept of the game, which really gets down to like building stuff as much as it is doing things. The problem is that Minecraft really doesn't resonate with people that want a much more traditional gaming experience. Because if you're not building in Minecraft, if you're not really a builder or have the mindset of it, you're not going to fully enjoy the game at its fullest. You're not really going to get the most out of it. That's the weirdest thing. And like, I get it. This is a game that's like been put on everywhere. It's got such a huge impact for a lot of people. It's sold over almost, or at least not over, but close to about 240 million copies. At least that's what it says here. But still, when we get to the content of the game itself, like you'll see like really crazy things in Minecraft, but not everybody's doing something like that. So to include it in the top 25, I would include it on the top 100, but not this high up. I would put something else much higher up. Then we get to BioShock, which makes sense. I would include BioShock more closer to my top 20, but 23 seems okay. Then we get World of Warcraft, which I feel like should also be higher because World of Warcraft was another one that really did so much stuff for the MMORPG genre that really like to say that it didn't have such a significant impact would be like a massive L, like just to make a statement like that. World of Warcraft is so important to the genre and more so important to gaming culture as a whole that it needs to be in the top 20, at least to me. Now, number 21 is Halo Combat Evolved. I feel like Halo needs to be higher because Halo fundamentally also changed the way that we looked at first-person shooters. Before then, really the apex or really the archetype of the first-person shooter was Doom, the original Doom, and Doom 2. You could say all that stuff. There was a lot of Doom clones back in the day. You could even argue, as much as I love Quake, it's really fundamentally based on a lot of concepts that were established in the first Doom game that made it what it was. It made the genre what it was. It wasn't until Halo came around that things changed up, especially for console first-person shooters. And that wouldn't happen again until we get Call of Duty 4 years later on the Xbox 360. So to me, Halo's got to be higher on that list because there's a lot of iconic stuff in Halo that doesn't get enough credit. Now we get number 20, the top 20 games of all time, right? Let me take a sip of this drink because I'm going to need a stronger drink after this, right? Let me tell you, I got problems with the top 20 now. Number 20 is Elden Ring. This should not be in the top 20. I am sorry. I have talked about it so many times. I get it. People love Elden Ring. They love the Soulsborne genre and the whole thing. But this is not top 20 best games of all time. Straight up. If you want to include it on the top 100 list, this got to be far lower than a lot of other games. Real talk. Because there's so much recency bias with this game and so much overhyping of this game. It's ridiculous. People were scoring this like 10 out of 10s. I'm like, are you serious? Like, did we play the same game? Even the genre itself alone, okay, with the way that this game plays and its level of difficulty and the way that it's so like tedious and so frustrating for so many people, not the top 20, should not be included in the top 20 best games of all time. I'm sorry, even if you love Elden Ring, you got to admit that. You got to at least agree with me on that one. There is no way that this game is higher than almost all the other games I've mentioned on this list, especially with the way that it will be played over the years to come, because I'm sorry, like, a lot of people love Elden Ring. There's a lot of people that played it and finished it, but it is not one of the best top 20 games of all time. Hell no. Hell no. This is all because a lot of the people they went to on this list, literally some of them, a good chunk of them, just love Elden Ring or they love being part of the Souls community. Straight up. That's one of the biggest reasons why that is. So some people will disagree with me on that, but if we're talking about the top 100 games of all time, you really got to open up your scope here on your perspective. Because seriously, top 20? Nah. Now, number 19 is Doom, the 1993 version of Doom. I feel like this one should probably be a little bit higher because this is, again, it fundamentally changed the genre of first-person shooters and define what a first-person shooter was. And I feel like also the original Doom, you could still go back to today and have a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of games that were Doom clones from back in the day, but like if you boot up Doom like on your Xbox Game Pass, like on your Series X or Series S, or if you pop it in on your PlayStation, or even the Nintendo Switch, or even your PC, which is what I feel like Doom is meant to be played on, you're going to have a fantastic time. Like that's a game you could go back to again, and again. It should be so much higher on this list. Then we get number 18, Super Mario 64. This is a game that I feel like you could probably include it a little bit higher because really like Super Mario 64 is really starting to show its age nowadays, but it's still one of the best games of all time when it comes to the action platformer or the 3D platformer, because after Super Mario 64, we got Banjo-Kazooie, we got a lot of other games that are very similar to it, both on the N64, the PlayStation, and even in the years afterwards. And I think also a lot of the same stuff that was established in Super Mario 64 bled out into games like Mario Galaxy, Mario Odyssey, etc. So maybe you can include a little bit higher, depending on your preference. Number 17, Final Fantasy VII. Now, this is another one that I feel like you could probably include it a little bit higher. I think that it's the range, like in the top 15 maybe, is probably a good placement for it because I feel like this game specifically for the Final Fantasy series has become iconic, has become so influential to gaming culture, has really influenced the way that we looked at the Final Fantasy series as a whole and JRPGs as a whole. This was probably one of the more streamlined JRPGs from back in the day because I remember Final Fantasy VII in association with a lot of the anime and otaku culture for a lot of people, and especially during the days when Toonami was a big thing, when we started getting from the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 2 era, a lot of people would go back to these types of vibes. It was really Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, and games of similar sort that were like that. So you could probably include it a little bit higher, at least in my opinion, like the top 15, but good placement overall. Then we get into Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, which I feel like it's just here because it's been resold so many times. People go back to it so many times, but it is still a good game. So I'm okay with this placement, to be honest with you. Then Red Dead Redemption 2. This is another game which I feel like a lot of people really love. They put this over Grand Theft Auto 5. And if I really had to pick between the two, I would put Grand Theft Auto 5 to be higher than Red Dead Redemption 2. Some people would disagree with me on that, but I feel like the multiple characters you get in Grand Theft Auto 5, the scope of the area you can roam around in, I would have to really look at a comparison to see which game has the bigger map. But I also feel like you could do a lot more in Grand Theft Auto 5. I could be wrong. Like, we look at the stats and we go through like every single thing you could do, but still. Some people will probably switch it up like myself, but other people will be okay with this. Top 15 of all time, I think that's very debatable. I mean, where's Grand Theft Auto San Andreas? That's the other game that I feel like is missing here because they have Grand Theft Auto 5, but I don't know. I'm pretty sure maybe it's higher on the list. Now, here's one that I got a huge problem with. Huge problem with, man. Let me take a sip of this drink because we're going to have beef right now, right? I got beef with this one. I got straight up beef with this one. Number 14 is Super Mario World. Come on, bro. Come on. This is in the top 7 at least. Super Mario World, one of the best Mario games, if not the best 2D Mario game of all time. Are you kidding me? Number 14, bro? Seriously? Come on now. Really? This is one of those placements that's like, how can you put this so low? Now, granted, it's still within the top 15 of this list. But I still feel like, and I've even talked about it in a video here on the channel, Super Mario World is one of the best Mario games of all time, if not one of the best platformers of all time. Real talk. So to put it so low on this list, not in the top 10, not in the top 7, at least, it would be in a top 5 for me personally. But still, this one's way too low for me. Real talk. Here's the next one also I feel like is also too low. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. This is a top 10 at least, but they got it as number 13. And they put it at least over Majora's Mask. I think that Ocarina of Time is better than Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask, compared to this, is way low in the totem pole. And I think that a lot of Zelda fans would have a big problem with that. It's just weird to see this one over here. And I feel like it should be in the top 10 because so many people go back to it. There's so many references to it, so many influences from this game that bled off into other games afterwards. I feel like this is just way too low for me. It's such a great game that you could go back to. And then the next one, Disco Elysium. Like, I feel like this is another game that a lot of people overhype. Like, I've never played Disco Elysium myself. I've only seen footage of it, but it doesn't look like a game I would really be all that excited or really enthusiastic to play. Or at least better than The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time or many other games I've mentioned on this. Is better than Super Mario World. Better than freaking Grand Theft Auto 5. Like, really? Come on, son. Number 11, Resident Evil 4. I feel like this one's way too high. This one I would put much lower, and I love Resident Evil 4. I know a lot of people hate on Resident Evil 4 for one reason or another. Same thing with the reboot of it, but still, I feel like as good as Resident Evil 4 is, not in the top 15. I wouldn't put it in the top 15 of all time. That seems like a way too high for me. Now we get into the top 10. Let me take another sip of this drink because now we are in the top 10. There's going to be so much beef in here. Oh my God. You want to talk about problems we're about to have, right? So the top 10. Okay, number 10 is Half-Life 2. I feel like maybe you could put this higher, maybe you could put this lower. I feel like with the top 10, this wouldn't be on the top 10 for me. This one I would probably include in the top 20, maybe top 30, because as good as Half-Life 2 is, I don't feel like it's a game that a lot of people would go back to often with first-person shooters specifically. Because as interesting as it is and as revolutionary as it was with its physics and a lot of other stuff, on PC and on consoles, because remember, you could play Half-Life 2 with the orange box on consoles. But still, I feel like there are other first-person shooters that more people are willing to go back to, more people found that were much more influential for the first-person shooter genre, that were much more artistically creative, in comparison. Some people will disagree with me on that, especially if you're a big fan of like Steam and of like Valve and all this other stuff. But I feel like I would put something like Halo, I would put something like Call of Duty 4 over Half-Life 2, even though I understand the big stark differences between them. If we're talking the greatest games of all time, the ones that have the most influence, the ones that are the ones you have to go back to, I feel like this would be lower on the list than for me. Number 9, Dark Souls. And again, I feel like this is another one that is still super overhyped. Like, you could include Dark Souls, maybe Demon Souls in the top 100 games of all time. I would disagree with it, but I understand why. But in the top 10 of all time, hell no. Hell no. I find it way too frustrating. I find it way too exceedingly difficult for most people. Not so much for myself always, even though I hate the difficulty spikes in Dark Souls. I feel like there's so many other games that would be better suited for a top 10 like this. But I digress, right? Number 8 is Portal 2. A lot of people would say that Portal 2 is better than Portal 1. I like Portal 1 better than Portal 2. Maybe not top 10, personally, for me. I would probably put a different game here in the top 10, or at least in the top 8 like that. But I understand why they put it up here or why people chose that. I just wouldn't put it in my own personal top 10. Number 7. Now we're starting to get into some maybe okay placement, right? Number 7 is the original Metal Gear Solid. Now I understand why this is in the top 10. And I think I actually am cool with this placement because Metal Gear Solid, the original, I don't think has aged all that well nowadays. It aged a little bit better back then when we weren't really spoiled with certain things involving the action, stealth genre, or stealth espionage action with some of the other Metal Gear Solid games. It still is a marquee and an iconic game with the cinematic storytelling. That's a marquee of Hideo Kojima with some of the iconic music, the iconic characters, some of the staples for that begun here in the rest of the series. This game is awesome. It's great. Maybe you could put it lower, but for me personally, I think this is a good placement of it. You got to talk about Metal Gear Solid if you're talking about the top 10 greatest games of all time, especially ones that impact and really influence other games with telling a story in a cinematic setting, or at least trying to emulate what we saw in movies. That's a Hideo Kojima joint, straight up, that needs to be talked about. Funny enough, we got that at number 7. No mention of Metal Gear Solid 2, which I think is, you got to talk about that in the top 100, personally for me, but I digress. So, some of the people they went here, the experts, quote unquote, seem to be very suspect right now. Number 6, Mass Effect 2. This one I also feel like is way too high. I feel like you could include Mass Effect, like I said, with the original game, which was so low on the list in comparison. But this one I feel like is not top 10. I love Mass Effects. I really enjoy Mass Effect 1 through 3. But this game I feel like is way too high. Should not be in the top 10, personally. Number 5 is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Now, this one, I feel like you could get closer to the top 10. Maybe this one's placed way too high, personally, for my taste. But I understand The Witcher 3 is dope. It's one of the best RPGs of all time that you could definitely play. Maybe not top 10 games of all time. That's the weird thing. We're talking the best RPGs of all time, definitely in the top 10. We're talking the best games of all time, I wouldn't put it in the top 10 personally. I would probably put it damn close, though. So maybe top 12, top 15, give or take here and there. But still, it's still a fantastic game you have to play. I did a review of The Witcher 3 that you guys could definitely check out here on the channel, and I got really into it. It's really, really dope. But again, we're talking best games of all time, so we got to be honest with ourselves. Number 4 is Bloodborne. This is another one way too high on this list, man. This is that recency bias, right? This is that recency bias and that love for the Souls genre that I feel like a lot of the experts that they went to are constantly going to just give it props and really big it up and overhype this genre, man. Top 4, top 5 best games of all time? Really? Again, I understand that I've complained and moaned about the Souls genre for years at this point, but still, I feel like based on what I've seen from other people, my own experience, and what I've seen in comparison to other games, I wouldn't put Bloodborne in the top 10. Maybe top 30, maybe top 40, personally for me. Because I know a lot of people love that genre. A lot of people love this game specifically. But top 5? No. Definitely not, son. Would not put it up there. Now here's the one that now we get into the top 3. Okay, this one, I need another sip of this drink. Oh my God. Oh my God, man. Now we're going to start getting into more beef. This is when you're going to see me pop off. Seriously. This is when you're really going to see me pop off, okay? Number 3, okay, the top 3 games of all time according to GQ or British GQ and their quote-unquote experts, right? Number 3 for them is Tetris, 1985. Look, I've said multiple times, and I've been quoted on this, I've been on record saying this multiple times. Tetris is probably the greatest video game ever created because of how easy it is to get into, how much you could play it, how much you could get addicted to it, how much it is streamlined and pretty much, you could apply it to almost anything, how much you could get other people playing with you and getting into it. This is one of those games that is immaculate. That is literally as close as you could get to a perfect game as possible. And they put this as number 3. They put 2 other games above Tetris. I'm not talking about presentation. I'm not talking about, having a big AAA release, hitting all the benchmarks of the stuff that's like on modern day hardware. No, we're talking about the greatest games of all time, the most influential, the most impactful, the most significant, and the most relevant, and everything else related to these games. And you put Tetris as number 3? Seriously? You don't even need to be someone that's just a retro gamer to understand how impactful and how important Tetris is. You might not be into Tetris yourself, but you know Tetris, and you could play Tetris. You could sit down and actually enjoy Tetris more so than you could most other games very quickly. A lot more quicker than most other releases that have even come out today. And you're going to tell me it's the number 3 best game of all time? It's not number 1 or 2? Like, I would even respect it if it was number 2. Okay? Including another game that was on this list that was so much more lower on this list than what it needed to be, alongside Tetris. If that other game, and to be honest with you, should have been Super Mario Brothers as number 1, to be totally honest with you, or this, Tetris as number 1, but you're going to put Tetris as number 3? And it's Game Boy Tetris, by the way. They're using the screenshot for it, but you could say any Tetris, like on the PC, on the Game Boy, or any other platform. You put this one as number 3? Really? Really, GQ? Okay, fine. Let's see what they got as number 2. Oh my God. Oh my God. I'm gonna need to sit down for this one. The Last of Us from 2013 as number 2 greatest game of all time. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me right now? Tetris, which was the one prior to this, has the Guinness Book of World Records as the most ported game ever made on 64 or 65 platforms, and one of the greatest out of the games that have ever been made. And you're going to put The Last of Us, the first game, above Tetris, son? Like, come on. This to me is another example of like recency bias. Because look, The Last of Us, I like. The first Last of Us game, I think, is better than the second game, better than part 2. I think that it's a great game when you want to hear an interesting story, you want to see interesting characters, and you can really sit down and enjoy it. It's a depressing story, don't get me wrong. It has a lot of depressing elements and weird elements to it. But it's still an interesting game that could push the envelope a little bit when it comes to cinematic storytelling with a video game. But as the number 2 greatest game of all time, hell no. This is way overhyped. And I even said The Last of Us Part 2 is also way overhyped. But this right here as number 2 on this top 100 list, nah, bro. This is a prime example of why a lot of the experts that they went to and the people that they went to contribute to this are way, way too caught up on the hype of this game and the hype of this series too. I feel like this is almost like a disingenuous pick. But then we get to number 1. Oh my God. I can't believe I have to even say this. Oh my God. Let me take one last sip of this drink here because we are really going to have to talk about this, right? A big gulp for this nonsense, man. The number one greatest game of all time, according to this list by GQ UK or British GQ. Number 1 is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild from 2017. Are you kidding me? Are you 100% kidding me right now? You're going to tell me that this game, this Zelda game, which by the way, I know a lot of Zelda fans that don't feel Breath of the Wild. They don't think it's as good as some of the previous Zelda games that come before it. You mean to tell me The Legend of Zelda, The Breath of the Wild, or Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild, I almost misspoke there. Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild is the number 1 greatest game of all time? Are you kidding me? People put this on there like that as their number 1? This is why I'm telling you, like recency bias. Like these people that they went to are not looking at the greater scope of history of video games. They're not looking at the impact, the significance, the relevance, the influence that it had on other games. Like, I'm sorry. When your own community and your own fandom, there's pockets of different people that say that they don't feel Breath of the Wild or even Tears of the Kingdom to an extent, because I know a lot of people are excited about The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. You know, some of those same people are saying they don't like Breath of the Wild as much as they probably like Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess or Wind Waker or anything else prior to it, Link to the Past. You mean to tell me that this game is the number 1 game of all time? Come on, man. Come on, GQ. Come on, you should know better than this. If you really went to all these experts, and by the way, these experts and the people that I saw in there should know better than this. Should know a lot better. Real talk. Like, I get it. You like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, but this feels like a disingenuous pick and a disingenuous placement. Even the biggest Legend of Zelda fans out there will admit to you, Breath of the Wild is not the greatest video game ever made. And I would even argue some of their picks for their own games. If they're just diehard Zelda fans, they would probably say something like Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask or even, Twilight Princess or Wind Waker or maybe even the original NES Zelda. You know, there's a lot of different games they would go to before Breath of the Wild. So how is this voted as the number 1 best game of all time in a top 100 list? Like, I'm not saying you can't include Breath of the Wild in a list like this. Like, again, these lists are all subjective, and this one was done by committee, but like the votes on here, like, come on. Like, some of these people, like, it's amazing to me. It feels like this was a pick just to kind of like appeal to Nintendo. That's what it feels like. I'm not saying that is, and I know a lot of that gets thrown around all the time, but that's how it looks from here. You mean to tell me this is the best game of all time, better than Tetris, one of the most influential video games of all time? Mind you, we have gone through this entire list, and I'm just going to run through some games that have not even been included on here, and it's really going to give you an insight into what, like what type of weirdness and like how shameful some of these experts were in choosing some of their games. There is no Pac-Man. There is no, Tekken. There's nobody on this list. Like, whoever mentioned fighting games, nobody mentioned Tekken 3 or Tekken Tag Tournament. For real? There's no Soul Calibur. Are you kidding me? There's no Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Like, what? Like, are you serious? There's no Quake? There's no Quake. Come on, son. Like, no Quake. Are you kidding me? There's no Sonic the Hedgehog? Are you joking me? One of the pillars of the console wars from back in the day that went toe-to-toe with Mario? You're not going to include Sonic 3? Hell, I would have even respected, even though I don't like it, Sonic Adventure? None of that? Are we joking here? No Super Smash Brothers? Oh my God. Oh, like, come on, son. Like, I'm looking at some of my games like that I'm just like, no, that's the other one too. I can't believe I have to say this. No Mortal Kombat? Really, bro? No Mortal Kombat. No Mortal Kombat 2? Nothing? You're talking about the 100 greatest video games of all time. And some of these games that you include on here are not going to include some of the biggest, most important, and the greatest video game series of all time at all. Some of those games, they're not even mentioned on here at all, period. Like, straight up. No Crash Bandicoot. No Crash Bandicoot 2. Are we serious right now? No, none of that. Like, what the hell? Like, what the heck is going on over here? No Fire Emblem, by the way. No Fire Emblem Awakening. I mean, I'm throwing out like random games in here that I feel like should have been included on this top 100 list. I mean, you could debate about Fire Emblem. You could even debate about Kid Icarus. Heck, you could even debate about something as crazy as like, I don't know, like Toe Jam and Earl. Like, what the hell? Like, what type of list were you guys getting from these people? What did you ask them to make like a top 10 list of your best games of all time? And you just pick and chose which one's got the most votes? Like, seriously, like, and here's the other thing too. We're going to go down to this list of experts, right? Now, I'm not going to read off any of the names they've included in here because I don't think that's a good thing to do because some of these people I find very questionable that are even gone to as experts in here for many different reasons. But I'm not going to do that. I think that's unclassy. There's some in here that I recognize that I think are good people to go to talk about games, especially on a more historical scale, that is a little bit more than what some of the more recent games that we've gotten lately. I think that's fine. And even going to some game developers, I think is good. But then there's other people in here that I'm like, why would you even talk to this person? Like, they're not even like, into critiquing games, let alone even talking about games in a historical sense. Like, why would you do that? So what I am going to say though, what I think is kind of funny, okay, is weird how there are certain people that you would expect a list like this to have some sort of input in, that they would go to and ask about this, that they just did not do so. There's no Pat Contry, the NES punk. There's no James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd, which you could argue that these people are content creators, but these are also people that talk about retro gaming and have a much more bigger scope about games in a historical context, as opposed to a lot of the journalists and other people that they went to in here. Nobody went to Colin Moriarty or anybody from Last Stand Media. Didn't go to Dustin. Didn't go to Mr. Matty Plays or any of the lords, the Iron Lords. Because there's only so much like Xbox representation and PlayStation representation in here, which I feel like is because a lot of the people that they've asked on a lot of this stuff didn't even really know about much of these games, or at least didn't have the perspective to comment on them or even to include them on here. Like, there's a lot more other people that I feel like they could have gone to. Nobody from Easy Allies? Nobody? Like, at all? Like, really? Like, there's so many other individuals you could have gone into this that could have contributed, that you could have even had a much more diverse lineup of games that are included on this list, especially for some of the bigger series that should be included on here. It's like, come on, man. Come on now. I'm still amazed that you don't include a game or series like Pac-Man in here or Mortal Kombat or Sonic the Hedgehog. Like, oh my God. No Star Wars games, apparently. Like, no Star Wars Battlefront. Like, you mean to tell me that a game that is still played even to this day ever since 2005, like Star Wars Battlefront 2, is not included in some of the top 100 greatest games of all time? Or you're not even going to include the better of the Grand Theft Auto games, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas on here? You include Grand Theft Auto 3. You include, Grand Theft Auto 5, okay? But not San Andreas? Like, really? I would include San Andreas over Grand Theft Auto 3, to be honest with you, even though I know that game changed up a lot of stuff, but Grand Theft Auto San Andreas perfected it. I'm just saying, like, and again, we could get into all these like petty discrepancies. We could get into all these stuff, here and there. But I feel like there's a real lack of perspective in this list that is so apparent. And again, when you go through the list, you could see it yourself. You can notice that a lot of the different people, like I mentioned before, a lot of people seem to be either friends with each other or just people that know each other, rather than actually going to a lot of different individuals with a greater, much more relevant perspective on games as a whole. Because, man, this list is incredibly disappointing. Incredibly disappointing with some of the placements and some of the inclusions or the exclusions on this list. So anyway, I've been going on for about an hour. I know this is a much longer episode. I'm just going to upload this as is. Not going to do a whole lot of like editing and stuff. So there'll probably be those little pauses and stuff here and there that you might have noticed. But still, I feel like this is an interesting discussion. And again, you don't have to get too caught up on it. You don't need to take it too seriously. But still, I feel like, man, this is the type of stuff we should talk about when we feel like we have something to say about it, or that we have a discrepancy, or have something that we have like a difference in perspective, or difference in opinion on stuff. But let me know some of your thoughts about all these things in the comment section down below. What are some of your favorite games of all time? Which are the games that are in your top 10 of the greatest games of all time that you would include on your own list? Tell me about that in the comment section down below. Make sure you guys leave a like on this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Make sure you check out some of the new uploads that I've been uploading to the channel lately, including my review of Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which is out right now. I've done some gameplay and discussion about Redfall, probably the worst game that I played in 2023, which is pretty wild, and many other different games, and also YouTube shorts that I know you guys will love. With that being said, I will talk to all of you again very soon. Peace out, and stay epic, everybody.